one of the things about what we're doing with Diamond Tree is we're profiling level 5 leaders. And one of the main characteristics of a level 5 leaders, they don't call attention to themselves, right? And the founder, I think he was the founder of Oracle, is pretty much the opposite of that. so just, and I don't know if I share this. Did I share the story where Mike and I did the conference in San Diego when we first moved there?
No, I don't think so.
So when I first moved to San Diego with our mutual friend Mike, we took a temp job because we just needed to get some work. So we went to a tape agency, and we basically were sort of these like badge scanners for the huge Oracle conference.
Oh,
and
okay.
So that was our first like introduction to work in San Diego. It was just like for like a 3-day gig where we were working at this thing. So anyways, at the time, I didn't really know anything about Oracle or anything like that, or who Larry Ellison was or anything, but he was treated like such a rock star. I mean, it was so, not only was he treated that way, he obviously was inviting that type of treatment. Like when he walked in, it was just this. So famously also, Oracle kind of grew to the size it did largely on the backs of a super aggressive sales force. So he was a very aggressive kind of person who hired very aggressive sales teams and pushed them very hard. So as you kind of came into Oracle, and also that was a Silicon Valley culture. How did you feel that in the culture when you were there? Like, how did that actually express itself in the culture of the company?
Yeah, so it was definitely prominent in the culture of the company. And keep in mind, I work in a sales organization, so I was somewhat expecting some of that as it was, right?
Yeah.
Because sales organizations are often filled with, like, for lack of a better term, alpha males.
Yeah.
Right. And they're all trying to get money and trying to, all this stuff. So what was interesting was the group that I joined initially was actually very collaborative, and that's what attracted me to it. Was hey, I've got a bunch of other sales engineers here who are very collaborative. They're teamwork oriented. In fact, I remember one of my first days there was some concept in one of the manuals I didn't understand. So my colleague said, "Hey, let's go over here." He took up, basically took time out of his day to put a whole whiteboarding session together for me, and that was kind of the culture that we had. And it was very collaborative. What happened over the ensuing 10 years was a lot more of that kind of, that push down from the top in terms of, hey, we have to be aggressive. You have to go after every customer. You have to milk them for everything they're worth. It became more and more domineering in the organization, a lot more pervasive. It probably was there initially, but being a Silicon Valley based company and being on the East Coast, we were separated from that.
Right.
Over time, what happened was you could tell that was the profile of individual they were looking for. And a lot of the reason as to why I left, why it was, I don't want to say easy, but relatively easier for me to leave, was because I didn't agree with the culture anymore.
Right.
I was like, this collaborative kind of everybody's in it to succeed together culture was completely eroded. And for me, I wanted to work somewhere. I didn't just believe in the tech, but I believed in the principles and the processes and the people. And there was a dichotomy at that point in my career where I was like, I just can't in good faith continue to work in an organization that I feel is really not treating its customers properly or its employees.
Yeah. And so when you saw that culture kind of shift come over and became more aggressive, and you felt like the more aggressive sales targets, et cetera, did you actually witness the sort of dissolving of the teamwork and people helping each other, and it became more competitive amongst the individuals in the organization?
It did, and it didn't just in terms of the people who were already there, because we remember that culture, right? But it was the new people that were being brought in. And again, everybody that comes in new wants to make an impact. When they see that the only way they can make that impact is by being that aggressive, kind of domineering person, then that's what that aspect of themselves they're gonna put out there, right? So again, not to say that people were bad or anything like that. It was just, it fostered this kind of like, hey, in order to succeed, you've got to be in it for yourself. And that was just not something I was interested in promoting.
Yeah. So that, that's actually a theme I return to a lot, which is people find themselves in one or more, usually more than one group. And there's just a very natural human tendency to try to gain status and rise in that group. And so people just adopt whatever the value system is whatever the value system is that helps them rise in that group. And sometimes they don't even think through, are these my values or not my values? And I mean, I just see this over and over and over again, where people they get in a competitive environment. They're like, okay, this is what it takes to succeed here. And those values they just adopt them, just because what becomes overwhelming is survival and advancement, not so much reflection of, hey, are these actually my values?
You're 100% spot on, Pete. And one of the things that I don't think I gave enough credence to when I first became a leader was what kind of a role we as leaders play in shaping the culture,
Right.
right? And I started to see that at Oracle. At Oracle, when I became a leader, when I first made that jump from individual contributor to leader, right? I realized pretty quickly that this team is looking up to me.
Yeah.
And so they're looking to me not just for guidance, right? But for companionship, for understanding, for career development and growth. And I realized pretty early on that I may have the ability to shape culture here, even if it's just on my little team,
Right. Right.
right? And that was something I didn't necessarily think about. I think
Yeah.
about a lot now, but as I was getting into the role, it wasn't something I necessarily thought about. I was really more concerned about resource management. Like, hey, am I going to be
Right.
able to manage all the requests that are coming from sales and manage this and manage that? But the aspect of the job that was really kind of I hadn't thought through was the building of a culture. And pretty early on, I realized that has to be something intentional. It can't be something you just leave by the wayside, because then what happens is that domineering culture is going to seep itself in.
Yeah.
You've
So
got to
that's,
actively work against
yeah.
it.
So I want to explore that a little bit, but first I want to ask you, because I was in a similar situation in that I wanted to kind of create a culture within a group that where the culture might have been different than in the larger organization. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes as leaders, we have to be careful about that because we
Mhm.
only have so much time and energy and we got to decide where we're going to devote that.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, let's say you even knew that more than you did at the time. And you said, hey, here in from day one here at Oracle, I'm going to instill this culture. Would you been able to long-term succeed if the overall organization's culture was different than what you were trying to instill? How would you think through that?
My personal opinion is it's very difficult.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to do that. At an established organization like Oracle, right?
Right.
It's been around for 30, 40, 30 plus years and has that. Very difficult. You can change it probably within your team, but long term, expecting that to kind of, venture out into the rest of the organization, I think is very tough. Again, this is my personal opinion. Part of the reason I took the job at MuleSoft was because it was small enough where I felt that I can start to make that impact and have that multiplier effect,
Yeah.
right? Because it wasn't established.
Right.
And that's something that I've taken very like kind of near and dear to my heart as we've grown out this team and this organization, is that I'm not just growing out people, it's the culture of the organization. I've got to be intentional. We've got to be, what Dan Coyle I think mentions in his book, the culture code. He's like, you have to be vulnerable, you've got to build psychological safety, and you have to have a shared purpose. And if you do
Mm-hmm.
those three things right, this culture is something that's very intentional for you to build, right? Otherwise, I think again, the dominating culture around you is going to kind of seep in, and that will begin to take its shape.